The American people at the behest of our country.
I think the day I talked to Sam was like the worst day of my life. It produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom.
Competition would start kicking in.
Treat me like a black person!
To help with connectivity.
If you like the stories you hear on the Majority Report, then check out the Sierra Club's new storytelling podcast, The Land I Trust. Season 2 of The Land I Trust brings you 14 storytellers from across the western U.S. who share their experiences in harvesting, protecting, and living with the 4 natural elements, with tales of climate change, clean energy, and everything in between. Listen to The Land I Trust at beyondcoal.org/stories. That's beyondcoal.org/stories or on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder. It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
September 20th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program, Senate passes a spending bill, funds Health and Human Services, and also gives the Pentagon a raise. Phew, finally. New report shows that the so-called idea debaters are actually gateway to white nationalists. Republican Governor hopeful DeSantis' campaign with yet another racist slip. And apparently Sean Hannity was the one who told Donald Trump to declassify Russia investigation material while the investigation continues. And lastly, Mike Pompeo, you'll recall last week certified that the Saudis were not killing civilians in Yemen. Turns out he did so despite all of his staff saying don't do it. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, folks, it is Thursday. Welcome to the program. This will be, well, I guess we've got that trip to Las Vegas for the Tort Conference in the first week of October, but we're now have the Jewish holidays in the rearview mirror. This week will be the last week that is funky. We will get back to some semblance of normalcy. Of course, we won't get back to any sense of normalcy for a long time in this country, but at least the program will be more or less as it usually is. It is unclear at this point what's going to happen Monday. As you know, at the beginning of the week, I guess it was Tuesday, maybe by Monday, it appeared that Christine Blasey Ford would be testifying on Monday of next week. At this juncture, subsequent to her attorney saying, I guess so, on Sunday morning or Monday morning, that she would testify, she requested, which is basically par for the course, an FBI investigation into the matter. Now, it would be very weird for someone who is lying to request an FBI investigation, which could quite possibly debunk what she's saying. I mean, if she was to get up there and say there was no, and it was quite clear that the committee was aware, like the FBI wasn't able to substantiate any of your claims, that there was a party, that they were there, that anybody heard about this, none of it. And on the contrary, we know that there was or was not a party. We know that there was or was not other people at that party. And the FBI could dig into it. But the Republicans don't want that. They want just to put an accuser up there who is very nervous about being in public because of the death threats that have obviously followed since she come out, et cetera, et cetera.
She's got daughters.
And the Republicans are hoping that she would say she would not show up. It's quite possible she may not show up on Monday. However, it's also quite possible that she may start going on television on Friday. And by Sunday, maybe she's on 60 Minutes and she's telling her story. Now, Brett Kavanaugh is not going to go on 60 Minutes. It would be awkward for him to do so. So it's unclear what happens. It's unclear what happens if the Republicans go ahead and vote for Brett Kavanaugh, having essentially driven the witness away from a hearing. And what it's going to mean for someone like Collins or Murkowski. So there's a lot of things up in the air at this point. There's also this other story, and we don't know what the status is of it, of federal judicial employees who may have some information involving Brett Kavanaugh's awareness that his mentor, Kaczynski, famous judge, federal judge, who was brought down by his own problems with sexual, I don't know if it was quite assault, but it certainly was inappropriate. Impropriety. Showing porno to his clerks and whatnot. I don't know what the status is of that. We may run tomorrow for members an interview I did that will play on Ring of Fire radio. So if you happen to live in a place where Ring of Fire plays terrestrially, We may run an interview I did with Ryan Grimm, who broke both of these stories. They're big stories. And I floated for him, is there any chance that the Republicans were somewhat interested in keeping this seat vacant? He had that thought too, he said, but hasn't heard anybody articulate that. It definitely appears now that they would like to vote Kavanaugh in. But this is changing minute to minute. I really do think. And so we will see. We will see what goes forward. But interesting detail on this video, which you may or may not have seen by now. Brett Kavanaugh apparently giving a speech. And where was he giving this speech?
American University.
At American University. And he was talking about his attending Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law. And I guess he was making a couple of jokes about it. But before he did, and I want to make sure that we provide this entire context here. At least I will read it off because I don't know if we have the video. Apparently the speech went like this. Our motto at Georgetown Prep was to be men for others. It was an all-boys school. To be men for others, Kavanaugh said. And I know this school, this is, he was at American University. This school helps teach its students to be lawyers for others, to serve the public and to serve others who are in need. He went on to discuss teachers and coaches he had and sayings of theirs that he recalled. Then he said this.
We had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before.
Oh, pause it. Okay, let me just add. He said, I, by coincidence, 3 classmates of mine at Georgetown Prep were graduates of this law school in 1990 and are really, really good friends of mine. Mike Bidwell, Don Ergo, and Phil Merkel. And they were good friends of mine, and they are still good friends of mine as recently as this weekend when we were all on email together. Now started from the beginning.
We had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before the talk, which is what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. That's been a good thing for all of us, I think.
Yeah, all of us, all 3 of them. And fortunately, he started that saying. So here he is saying that at this speech. Now, don't want to make too much of this. There's a published version of this speech. And the chunk of speech that I just read off about these sayings was edited out. Now, law school articles, they edit this stuff pretty rigorously. Maybe it wasn't relevant. Maybe the stuff about...
Put that in the memory hole.
Yeah,
really wasn't relevant.
Who knows? It wasn't in the article. But the point being that there's a story to be told, apparently, at this school. And if we wanted to know that story, they would let the other person who is accused of being in the room, Mark Judge, testify. He has refused to testify. He could be subpoenaed. Seems fairly relevant, right? I mean, you want to exonerate this Supreme Court justice before he sits on the court. But apparently they don't think it's that important to have Mark Judge there. In his 1997 memoir, Wasted Tales of a Gen X Drunk, Mark Judge was talking about 100 kegs or bust that he and Kavanaugh referenced on their prep school yearbook. Who knows? I guess we shall see. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Professor Adam Tooze on his book, Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program a professor of history at Columbia University, author of The Deluge, and his most recent is Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. Adam Tooze, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Now, we're almost to the day, I guess maybe 4 or 5 days, but pretty close to the 10-year anniversary of Lehman's meltdown, essentially, which was really the bell ringing in terms of this financial crisis. I think there's not necessarily a sense for most folks in this country how sort of international this crisis was at that moment. Can you, before we go back and sort of do a run-up to what happened in this country and the sort of the political decisions that followed in its wake, can you give us a sense of why there was the impact internationally and why for a crisis that emanated presumably in the United States?
Well, it's because the global banking system is so deeply interconnected, and so American banks like Lehman do a lot of their business in what are for American banks offshore centers like the City of London. American money market mutual funds were deeply invested in the debt of European banks. European banks had then flushed the Eurozone, notably Ireland and Spain, with credit to create housing bubbles that were much, much larger in proportional terms than the US housing bubble. And Ireland is small, but Spain isn't. Spain is a Texas-sized chunk of the global economy. And then European banks had returned quite a lot of that money to the United States and invested very heavily in securitized subprime. And all of the banks in the world, whether or not they're actually invested in subprime, all take money from an increasingly large amounts of money since the 1990s from what's called the wholesale money market, so the interbank market, and borrow directly from funds of various types. And as the panic spreads, already weeks before Lehman, but Lehman really brought it to a head. No bank anywhere in the world can get funding anymore in those interbank markets, in those money markets, and that produces a global heart attack. So it goes all the way from South Korea and Russia to, of course, the United States, but by way of most of the major banking centers of Europe: Frankfurt, Paris, London, the Benelux, so Belgium and Netherlands, and Switzerland, of course, are all massively affected. And then that begins to spill outwards towards Eastern Europe and Northern Europe by way of the Baltic states and Denmark and Sweden. So it's truly an interconnected system. Globalization is for real. Banks are at the cutting edge of it. And so a crisis anywhere affects everyone.
And is it the same as it travels through the sort of that blood stream? In other words, the what was problematic in the States was the same as or created the same problem internationally, or was it a change depending on the locality, or how downstream from the initial heart attack, I guess, was. I mean, and explain to us, like, are we talking about sort of there's just no liquidity, or is it just that everybody basically called in their chips at the same time?
Well, that's what everyone calling in their chips at the same time causes the liquidity problem. No bank is safe if that happens. All of the banks were fishing from the same pool of liquidity. So really, in the first instance, what's happening in September 2008 is pretty much the same crisis all across the world. I mean, when we say there's no liquidity, what we mean is just it's very, very expensive. And it was marginally more expensive in Europe to get dollar liquidity than in the US. But that was enough to cause an absolute crisis in Europe. The European banks are larger in their balance sheets, not just in relative, but in the absolute terms than their American counterparts. Lehman is a relatively modest-sized bank, but there are several banks in Europe which can go toe-to-toe with the very biggest, Bank of America and Citigroup in the US. And they're all simultaneously suffering this massive loss of liquidity, conditioned by uncertain losses on their portfolios of real investments, which will or will not be realized sometime down the line, but no one wants to hang around to find out. So everyone is pulling their funding simultaneously. And that then begins to feed out very rapidly from the financial sector to the real economy. So within weeks, Chinese factories are shutting down, German factories are shutting down, Mexican factories are shutting down. This moves very quickly from being a real estate crisis to being a banking crisis to being a crisis of the whole world economy. The most rapid fall on trade ever recorded happened.
I'm sorry, Professor, we're losing you just a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's...
So the most severe collapse in global trade ever recorded happened in the final months of 2008. So this moves very quickly from being a real estate crisis to a banking crisis to a full-blown economic crisis.
Okay, and Professor, I don't know if you're on a headset or what, but it's cutting in a little bit, cutting out just a little bit. If you're on a headset, maybe it would be best to go directly into the phone. But all right, so but continuing forward, so moving backwards, I should say at that point, what in the run up to 2008, like how big is the wind up? Like where would you start counting the sort of the path to this crisis? And I guess maybe, and it's your decision as to where it was inevitable versus where there could have been short circuits that would have prevented getting to where we got to.
Well, if you're talking about the subprime real estate bubble, that blows up really quite quickly from 2003-4 onwards. Early in the new century, Greenspan dumps interest rates in response to the dot-com bubble bursting and the shock of 9/11, and that produces, as you would expect, a huge surge in refinancing business in the United States. It also reduces interest rates around the world and helps the boom to get going in Western Europe as well. But that first phase is actually pretty much conforming, standard, low-risk mortgages. It's really from 2004 onwards that you get this sudden burst of what are called private label, so not Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac authorized mortgages. I'm sorry,
Professor. I'm sorry. We're having trouble with your phone. Maybe we'll call you right back if that's okay.
I hear you. Okay, I'm sorry. I hear you absolutely fine.
Okay. All right. Let me call you right back. We'll call you right back. Folks, we'll be right back in just a moment. All right, Professor. Thank you. Apologies. So you're saying that in the early aughts, we saw a Greenspan basically dropping interest rates and juicing in many respects the returns that were coming from the housing market. And then in 2004, we entered into a slightly different phase.
Yes, exactly. This is really one driven by private label securitization and mortgages. So this is the classic subprime phase. And that's very sharp, very sudden. It results in about $1 trillion worth of lending. And that's the bit which then ultimately tips very suddenly in 2007 into crisis mode. It would, however, not have led to the comprehensive crisis that we saw in 2008 if it had not been for the fact that over a longer time horizon, really back to the 1980s and early 1990s, banking globally had moved to a model of banking funding, which was based on wholesale markets and the financing of fixed income assets. And it's really that, the combination of the two things, the surge in subprime from 2004, funded through a model which had been developing since the 1990s, which relies on this short-term money market-based funding. It's a combination of those things together that produces the possibility of 2008.
So our avoidance of that situation could have either been a function of changing the broader context of our financial markets, or preventing that sort of, injection of like a high wire act in 2004, essentially, right? That the securitization on steroids.
Yes, I think so. If all hands had been on deck on the regulatory side from 2004 onwards, it's possible that they might have been able to suppress some of the really low quality subprime securitization that goes on. The risks that needed to be worried about were not really, not even the countrywides or the Washington Mutuals. What caused systemic risk was the fact that, this stuff was accumulating on the balance sheets of the Citigroups and the Lehmans, which had the massive networked interconnection with the entire financial system. So it's one thing if your mortgage lenders, specialized mortgage lenders, go bad, which is what happened, say, in the same loans crisis of the 1980s. It's quite another if keystone commercial banks, high street banks, or keystone investment banks are entangled in that same mess. And the other thing, I guess, that would have had to have happened to contain this is global regulation of banking of a much tighter variety of the type that we have now with what's called Basel III. So a much closer attention to both the capitalization of the banks to increase their ability to absorb losses and liquidity, in other words, their ability to withstand runs of funding. And those have really been the key centers of attention in global bank regulation since the crisis.
To broaden out a little bit, what was the what were the narratives that the sort of the broader narratives that either in Europe or in this country that people had been operating under, like broad misconceptions that I guess, 2008 sort of, upended in many respects?
Well, I think that the most obvious one is the idea that markets and private actors, businesses in markets, can be expected to adequately insure their own risks by way of various types of derivative products. And this was fundamental to the laxness of banking regulation before 2008. The assumption was that the best risk models were the risk models that the banks themselves operated, because they knew best. They had obviously an interest in not self-destructing. And so surely to goodness, if one simply followed the best practice of the banks, then all would be well. And that clearly turned out to be a profound miscalculation. More broadly, I think what we've had to come to terms with is the fact that the fate of big private actors cannot be separated from the fate of the entire economy. This is the too big to fail problem. So not only are private actors not really capable of fully assessing the risks that they face, but when they make mistakes, if they're of a sufficiently large type, it has ramifications for everybody, which forces us then into public action of an unprecedented type. And so there you have a whole interconnected set of assumptions that really have come unstuck. And, if you go back to somebody like Greenspan, when he was asked in 2007 who he was going to vote for in 2008, he simply said, it doesn't matter who I vote for because we're fortunate enough to be in a world in which is basically governed by markets. So it doesn't matter who is the chief executive of the United States. It doesn't matter who the president is, except for foreign policy, except for security policy. And that obviously is the sort of the most fundamental delusion that was really blown apart by 2008.
There's a big whoopsie after that, it seems to me. All right. So let's talk about those political the implications. I mean, in this in Europe, in some respects. Well, let's talk about the political ramifications and the decisions that were made and the implications. Let's start in this country, and then we will move around the globe.
Well, I think in the US, what you see is this stark disjuncture, right, between a relatively effective technocratic management of the crisis itself, which, given its epic scale and the dangers that were involved, is quite remarkable in its own right. And by the summer of 2009, the immediate risk to the cardiovascular system of the United States economy has passed. The banking system is not fixed, but it is on the mend. And the real economy begins to recover from the second half of 2009, in part because of stimulus action, in part because of the recovery of confidence, the fact that things stopped getting worse. So that's, as it were, one side of the ledger. But on the other side of the ledger is the fact that the party political system as we know it is showing signs of coming apart at the seams, basically. And you began to see that already in the summer of 2008. And it's most visible, and it's very consequential, obviously, all the way down to the present inside the Republican Party. Because at the height of the crisis in the summer and fall of 2008, a Republican presidency, struggling to contain this crisis, cannot get the votes of its own party in Congress to support the bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or TARP, the instrument they use to recapitalize the American banks. And it relies essentially on the opposition in Congress, the Democrats, to do the deals that are necessary. And in 2009, with Obama in the White House, you then have this extraordinary kind of combination of both absolutely bloodthirsty partisan opposition in Congress by the leadership of the Republican Party, and an insurgency at the grassroots in the form of the Tea Party, which already has many of the elements of the alt-right, which have spiraled down to the present. And then on the other side of the divide, as disillusionment with the Obama presidency really sets in, by the fall of 2011, of course, you have the Occupy movement, which I take to be symbolic of a much broader disaffection of the left wing of American politics with the entire spectrum of mainstream parties in Washington. And so in that respect, this sort of triple, on the one hand, as it were, technocratic management, but then fraying of the ability of either the Democrats or the Republicans to contain these tensions, that really, I think, marks American politics and shapes the 2016 election.
I'm curious from your perspective how those two, the Republicans reacting and refusing early on to fund the bailout, as it were, and then Occupy. Those two phenomenons on different ideological. Like how would you characterize them in relationship to the crisis? In other words, because to me it seems like Occupy was a reaction to the way that the Obama administration responded, right? Like not enough stimulus, too much austerity, and by 11, there had been a pivot to austerity, versus the right and the Tea Party, which seemed to be a sort of taking advantage of an opportunity.
Well, on the one, I'd agree with that, but I also think that what we're seeing in the Republican response to the crisis is something more systemic, which is a profound reluctance on the part of a substantial body of Republicans to see public action, to see American government as in any way a creative and positive force in American society, and a profound fear that the state machinery with its powers of taxation and coercion and so on will be turned against whatever they take to be, the heart and soul of America. And that expresses it itself in lots of different forms. Part of it is that they in fact share with some people in the Occupy movement an analysis of the cronyism that's, turned federal government into a tool for the support of Wall Street. But much more importantly, and fundamental for the Tea Party, is essentially a kind of anti-welfare protest. The Tea Party doesn't start as a protest against the bailout of Wall Street. It starts as a protest against the possibility, the mere idea, which of course the Obama administration doesn't really ever follow through on, of a wholesale bailout for over-indebted American households who can't cope with their mortgages. That very idea is enough to launch the Tea Party. But in that, what triggers there is this much deeper, much more fundamental set of questions about what government in America is for, in a society which this part of the American political spectrum sees as drifting as a result of the culture wars and civil rights and so on in fundamentally the wrong direction. And so all of that fear and hostility towards the current trends in American society, culture, politics and so on manifests itself in a refusal to allow government to do anything really other than fight wars and mobilize troops and build a security apparatus. But any other function of government is illegitimate. And faced with the kind of crisis that we saw in 2008, that's of course profoundly dysfunctional because at that moment the business sector, which of course Republicans profess to support and to honor as, the great driving entrepreneurial force of American society, actually needs government support, which just doesn't fit into their vision of the world. So this is where you get this dysfunction and this split between the kind of managerial figures like Paulson and Bernanke, who are both mainline conservatives, and the party which they think they belong to, which is basically digging in its heels and acting as a kind of party of protest, essentially, at that moment.
That's fascinating. So and I guess to a certain extent, theoretically, American politics revolves around that axis of how people view government's role. And so if I understand you correctly, the right was responding to a fear that government would actually take a role, a front seat role, I guess, in fixing this crisis. And the left by 2011 was upset that it had not taken as much of a role as it should have.
Yes, absolutely. It had been no idea and done enough, and the role that it had played had been predictably once more, massively asymmetric and in favor of big business and not in favor of ordinary Americans. And so those are the accusations. And there is a part of the left which, of course, then says, oh, well, fine, we should smash the government as well. But that is by no means the dominant element. The predominant memory is surely the New Deal in its more radical phases, in which, or even maybe the Great Society moment, Head Start and civil rights and so on. Obviously, the American government has, in several different instances, played an absolutely fundamental role, certainly in the progressive narrative of American history. So, yes, I think that is really the best way to understand this. And of the two narratives at a moment of crisis, there's no question that the Democratic Party's narrative has more purchase on reality.
So what happens as this as we move across the globe in terms of, because presumably as we hit different countries and they are struck by this crisis, they have a different pre-existing I guess ideological debate, or do they? Or I would imagine some countries do, but
no, they absolutely do. That is the right way to think of it. The idea that there is, a crisis and then populism emerges out of this everywhere, and then you sort of cherry pick your way through the list of candidates is I think absolutely the wrong way to understand this. I do think, precisely as you suggested, if we think of this as an earthquake, how much damage an earthquake does depends on how close you are to the epicenter and how well your building was built and how well it's been maintained, and those are the key elements. And across the political systems of the West and the countries affected by this crisis, we see a corresponding range of, in some cases we can see analogous responses where the buildings were similarly constructed or they had similar, politics, maintaining them at various points. And then we also see radically divergent responses. So Spain, Greece, Portugal, even Italy, on one way of reading the Five-Star Movement there, have very powerful left-wing responses to the crisis. We have radical governments in both Greece and Portugal that come out of this. Countries which in many ways were less badly affected by the crisis, like Britain, nevertheless, as a result in part of the reaction to the austerity politics adopted by the Conservative government from 2010, see a turn towards this recalcitrant nationalist movement of Brexit, which itself draws on very long-standing traditions of Europhobia in Britain. So that's, I think, exactly the right way to think about this as a similar shock, an interrelated, deeply interrelated shock, which has a profoundly different political impact depending on the pre-existing structures in each case.
How much of what follows then begins to create a new set of crises? I guess, in other words, to extend the earthquake metaphor, the earthquake happens, but then there's a tsunami, or the earthquake happens and then we get an explosion from a nuclear power plant. No,
this is great. I haven't thought about it that way, but that's exactly how I would see something like Ukraine. So in the Ukraine crisis of 2013, you might think, what's that got to do with the financial crisis? I mean, surely this is just due to, long-standing legacies of Russian ambition, the post-Cold War anxiety in the East and so on. And all of that's true. But Ukraine is in harm's way, and Ukraine puts itself in harm's way because it's in desperate financial trouble. And it's in desperate financial trouble, of course, because of pre-existing problems, but also because the 2008 financial crisis had a devastating impact on Ukraine's economy. It was probably the worst affected economy in the world by 2008, because it's hugely dependent on foreign funding and hugely dependent on the export of steel, and no one wants steel when investment is plunging. So you can't understand the frantic way in which Kiev was bargaining back and forth between the EU and Moscow unless you understand that it was desperately trying to escape from an IMF program which it had slid into in 2008. And then, of course, the other things kick in. Then, of course, the botched EU diplomacy and the aggression of Moscow unhinges the situation and creates the crisis that we know. But that's precisely the sort of ripple effect and then causality that we see around the world following on from this.
Coming back to the States and the way that our government addressed it, I mean, how would you characterize this? And when we look at the players, Geithner and Paulson to a certain extent, where on the spectrum are they even involved? Like, how much of those pre-existing narratives are they deploying, or is their response less ideological and just more completely transactional based upon, for lack of a better word, like who their friends were?
Hi, this is a great question. I mean, who their friends were really matters, and the fact that they were all at least colleagues, if not friends, really makes the American situation unique, I think, in the incredibly kind of tight-knit community that was built from the 90s onwards. It really, I think, starts under the Clinton administration. That's at least when it becomes bipartisan. the network that connects Washington, the Treasury, to the New York Fed and Wall Street just becomes so close. So the men assembled in that room, Sheila Bair is the only woman who is present on the 13th of October, 2008, are all, even though Hank Paulson is sitting across the desk, on the other side of the desk, he's the ex-colleague as a former CEO of Goldman Sachs, of the banker sitting on the other side of the table. And when Geithner is appointed Treasury Secretary, it has become such a standing assumption that the Treasury Secretary is an ex-Goldman Sachs man that everyone imagines that he is, even though in fact he's a career public servant up to that point. So those social networks play a key role. I think the other thing which they mobilize are narratives of action, of executive power, of emergency management, which in fact in the American case are heavily indebted to America's military experience of recent decades, something that marks America as quite different from Europe. You don't see a lot of German crisis fighters talking about, the Powell Doctrine, which is derived from, the Vietnam War and its aftermath. So not a lot of Clausewitzians in the German finance ministry, let's put it that way, in the way that there are on the American side. But I do think ideology plays a role as well. I mean, if you listen to people like Geithner, it's quite clear that options like nationalizing a major American bank, above and beyond what they did anyway with taking a government stake by way of TARP in all of the banks, the idea of breaking up Citigroup, for instance, and resolving it with perhaps temporary government ownership, what was called the Swedish option in 2009, that was really a long way from anything that he ever wanted to take seriously and consider. And this was fully endorsed by Barack Obama as well. I mean, Barack Obama is absolutely a centrist on these kind of issues, gives a very revealing interview in 2009 where he says, that's just not something we're going to do. We understand that it worked well in Sweden. They had a banking crisis. They nationalized all their banks, restructured, and then privatized them again. We're just not going to do that here. That's not the way. That's not the American way. So I think there are really deeply entrenched ideological lines which shape this, despite the pragmatism and the social networks and so on that are also shaping the crisis response.
We spoke to David Dayen, a writer who I think cited you actually in his writing about Geithner over the past week or so as people revisit that time. And yeah. I can't quite remember the quote, but it had something to do with Geithner basically just swimming in certain waters. It was almost, it was preordained. And this had to do with Geithner, I guess, refusing to even provide for Obama the requested game plan if they were to take that Swedish option.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and Geithner has contested this. All of this goes back to Susskind's book about the Obama administration, which was very hotly contested by the Obama administration itself. It was damaging to them politically when it came out. And Geithner went on the record to flatly deny that he did slow walk the Citigroup proposal. So, in fairness to him, one should put that on the record that he refuses this narrative. But it is attested by several people that in the crucial meeting in the spring of 2009, the resolution of the meeting was that a game plan for the resolution of Citigroup was to be prepared, and this is what the president ordered, and it never happened. And what instead happened was the stress testing system, which Geithner preferred as the model to do this. There's no doubt that the Citigroup nexus that was organized around Robert Rubin was key to how the entire Obama economics team was recruited. It's a very dense network that revolves around Rubin, and the emails that on which the short lists of candidates for Obama cabinet positions were compiled came out of Citigroup email servers. So there's an undeniable sociology to this network,
right?
And one has to say it's highly functional. I mean, compared to what we see in Europe, the ability of the American elite, for better or worse, to coordinate its action at this moment is decisive in producing the coherent, comprehensive solution that emerges. Obviously, at considerable political cost, because not enough was done, if you like, to offset the quite legitimate impression that there was basically a kind of oligarchic cabal running the show. which, this is a first approximation. It's not a bad description of what was happening.
Now, I mean, this is the sort of the fascinating and sort of the scary, one of the scary parts about this is that from a technocratic perspective, they solved the crisis. They made political choices as to who would pay the cost of it in the long run. And you talk about a political cost, but at the end of the day, it is a political cost in the same way. Their relationship to this political cost is almost identical to my relationship to the New England Patriots losing last weekend. I'm super bummed about it. They're my team, but at the end of the day, it doesn't impact me at all, right? Right? Like all of these people, the political cost for them with Donald Trump is their taxes got cut. I mean, so their banking regulations got relaxed. There has been no cost for their decisions. It is a perfect model, it seems to me, of privatizing the profits and socializing the cost. And the political cost, it's unclear to me because none of these people have paid really any price. The Democrats, theoretically, right? Maybe Hillary Clinton, maybe some of these people would have had jobs, but there doesn't seem to be a cost that is borne by anyone within that social world, that circle.
I mean, I see you. I take your point that it's kind of, heads I win, tails you lose. From the point of view of the narrow domain of banking regulation and so on.
But I'm talking about like 90% of the people in this country, right? I mean, like the decisions that they could have made at any juncture, where we're going to bail out the homeowners, where we are going to break up the big banks so that there's no future systemic risk. All of these costs were borne by the vast majority of Americans. I mean, and I imagine also we could see a similar story in Europe, although it's complicated by, sort of the competence question and their ability to act, efficiently. But it seems to me all the cost has been borne by actually like everyone else. I don't want to be pushed into the position of like defending the record of the Obama administration, but I mean the answer that they would give. The answer, though, somebody like Guy will give is that the American taxpayer makes a profit on the bailouts. Right? So the crisis itself is a huge shock to the American economy, and that's where the cost is. The crisis itself is a disaster for millions of people who lose their homes, who suffer unemployment. That's where the cost is. The response of the government, in the end, paid for itself. And in terms of fixing structural problems in the U.S. society, the Obama administration took the considered decision that healthcare was the priority. This was the policy that would touch all Americans, especially lower-income Americans, and that was their political priority. And given the limited political capital they had, they were going to do stimulus first and foremost, which they did right from the word go. As soon as Obama was elected, they're working on that. And then their next priority is healthcare, and everything else is secondary to that. They do the political arithmetic on other options, including doing homeowner bailouts, and just decide that the arithmetic is not good enough to make it worth making a big push on this side. So it's going to be macroeconomic policy, a bailout which pays for itself, and healthcare, and those are going to be the three strands. Now, I mean, that's, I think, the best case you can make for the Obama administration, and that is the case that they will try and make. And obviously, you're absolutely right that the what costs remain are indeed burdened on the hugely disadvantaged minority that are hit by the immediate force of the shock. And above all, it's the minority communities of the United States, right, that suffer the hit because it's their wealth, such as it is, that's invested above all in real estate. And the Latino and African American communities of the United States suffer losses to their median household wealth that they will probably, will never recover from in any real meaningful sense, right? That money is never coming back, and over generations we will talk about entire communities which are much poorer than they were in 2007. So,
no, those shocks, that damage is real. And of course, we have all the ongoing effects of global change in this economic structure, which impact blue-collar, relatively less educated Americans severely and continue to impact them severely. And whilst government is doing this crisis fighting, it can't be minding the store on other issues. And so you have terrible cuts to education, which is presumably the bedrock of any public response across many of the states of the United States, because as much fiscal give as the federal government is doing, it's being taken away at the state level in many, many cases. So I agree with you, but the defense the Obama administration would make is in those terms.
Okay, and fair enough. And I appreciate you're holding their brief to a certain extent. Let me just ask you one more question about that, and then I just want to sort of go up to where we are in present day. The reported story that Barney Frank tells about Paulson saying all we need, this is when he was president-elect, all we need is President-elect Obama to sign off on bailing out the homeowners as the path in which to inject these funds, as opposed to going to the banks and hoping the banks then do principal reductions. Reportedly, Barney Frank says that he went to Obama and wanted Obama's sign-off, and Obama's response is, we only have one president at a time, type of thing. How does that fit into that narrative?
Well, I think all around TARP, there are a whole series of negotiations going on. I mean, TARP itself, which ultimately was used to recapitalize the banks, was sold the second time round to Congress as a measure that would provide substantial relief to homeowners. And then, of course, virtually none of the TARP funds were used for relief for homeowners. So there is an incredible amount of political jostling going on in those panic-stricken months in 2008, with different parties quite clear, I think, aware of the political costs of different options. No one overly anxious to carry the can of responsibility until they absolutely have to. And so that kind of political game seems to me to ring true as a description of what's going on in those 4 months.
Okay, and so all right, so let's jump forward 10 years later. What's the outlook? I mean, because that's the part that sort of scares me, is that I think all those people involved in that crisis are convinced that what they did was not only successful in salvaging the economy, but the only choice that they could have made, as opposed to a menu of other choices that could have been effective, but would have helped a different, would have helped the horse instead of the cart, as it were, or however you want to sort of envision that. Helped the broad mass of people and allow their success to buoy the banks versus, the success of the banks to sort of somehow catch up ultimately with the rest of the people.
Well, I mean, I think that with regard to the diagnosis of the crisis itself, I mean, Ben Bernanke and Paulson and Geithner have all been very much on the record in the last couple of weeks restating their side of the story. And it's difficult, I think, to argue with Ben Bernanke's latest report he did for Brookings. Use a medical analogy here. It's as though a very, very bad case of the flu was overlaid by a heart attack. And what happened in 2007 was there's an extremely bad case of the flu. Obviously, this doesn't make any sense in medical terms, but was then triggered a heart attack. And once the heart attack hits, once your cardiovascular system starts shutting down, there really isn't any alternative to the kind of measures that were taken in 2008. You have to recapitalize. You have to do liquidity provision on a huge scale. You probably have to do asset purchases. There isn't, one could argue around the edges about maybe using some more comprehensive bankruptcy provision over the summer of 2008 to just catch a lot of the pieces as they were falling and allow more of them to fall, perhaps even, so as to impose some of the losses where they really belong on the banks and their shareholders. But nevertheless, once that heart attack phase starts up, you really have to do those things, because otherwise the show's just going to stop. So the argument then is really, how does the element of the flu, how does the element of the business cycle that is to do with the real estate boom and the real estate bust, how do we address those problems as well, that pain, those losses? And to my mind, the single most important and most equitable response is massive fiscal policy. Homeowner relief is problematic because basically what you're doing is bailing out all sorts of people who've taken on loans which they probably shouldn't have taken on. And as we know, in the really hot spots of the United States, a lot of this was actually speculative. And this isn't the hard luck stories. This is the stories of middle-class Americans deciding they want to go into a little bit of real estate speculation. And that happened on a very large scale in the hot spots of the US. That isn't necessarily where you want to target relief. But fiscal policy of an adequate scale, a $2 trillion stimulus rather than a $750 billion stimulus, seems to me to be the way in which one should think about addressing these problems across the board. And that's simply a matter of politics. Can you get a $2 trillion stimulus through Congress? And the chances of doing that now are much slimmer than they were, of course, in 2008.
I just have to push back on on that one premise that it was that the bulk of this was and certainly
in hotspots.
In hotspots, so you're talking Florida.
In hotspot states, it really is. In places like Arizona, the percentage of second and third mortgages is enormous in 2007.
Right. I agreed. But when we're talking about 1.5 million foreclosures or 1.2.
Oh yeah.
I mean, certainly giving relief to those people, we're just stopping widespread suffering, right? I mean,
exactly. And there's various ways of doing this short of giving relief. You can stay the foreclosure procedures. There's of course a wide variety of techniques that can be used to stabilize this. But in a more positive vein, all of those are difficult to argue. They're extremely technical. They're complex, and they are, in a sense, fighting the symptoms. You're fighting the distress. Whereas if the main problem is that the national economy is entering a recession,
right,
which will repress house prices for years on end, then a big classic stimulus measure seems to me to be much more promising.
Right, and it's not an either-or situation, we should say, at that point.
Ideally you'd want to do both. Absolutely, ideally you'd want to do both.
Okay, so lastly, how precarious is our situation now? I mean, we have seen sort of like the slow degradation of Dodd-Frank, almost analogous to what we're seeing with the Affordable Care Act, which, in my estimation, makes a pretty good argument for taking a meat cleaver to these things rather than trying to perform surgery, where you simply restructure the way that these things are regulated or designed so that you can't unwind it as easily as it's been unwound by 2 years of Trump and a Republican Congress. But where are we in terms of the next crisis?
Well, we're clearly heading in the wrong direction. But I think it's important to distinguish, crises and crises. 2008 was a uniquely severe shock. We've not seen anything like that before in history, full stop. And so, I'm not expecting a repetition of something like that. Certainly not with the same structure, which really was fundamentally transatlantic, European and American at the same time. We're not, I don't think, at risk of anything like that, apart from anything else, because the European economy is so lame. Where we could see some risks of an analogous type would be in America's relationship with the emerging markets. But that's a very complex sort of futuristic scenario that's only really beginning to unfold. But in the meantime, one can't disagree. I mean, the evisceration of Dodd-Frank is terrible for the stability and of the American financial system in the long run, because troublesome as that system was, and perhaps overly bureaucratic for the smaller banks, it nevertheless provided, really the only major and significant changes that came out of the crisis were driven by Dodd-Frank and in combination with Basel III, Basel IV. For the big banks, what matters, of course, is the combination of both the national regulations and the global regulations put in place after the crisis. And those were designed from the start, above all by Geithner, to allow maximum discretion to the regulators. And that was a political gamble. It was a gamble that the Democrats would remain, or people like them would remain in charge of the show. And as they lost political power, that opened the door to precisely what we're seeing now, this gradual erosion. And as you were saying early on, it's kind of a win-win situation from the point of view of kind of elite establishment Wall Street types who might very well have preferred Clinton as president, but now find that profit making is a little bit easier.
Adam Tooze, the book is Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. We will put a link to it at majorityreportradio.com. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me on.
All right, folks. Going to head to the fun half. I should tell you, this is a massive book. It's 500, it's almost 600 pages.
I'm going to take that.
What's that?
I'm going to take it.
You're going to take this?
I think so, yeah.
Convert the whole thing into audio?
Take screenshots of it with my iPhone.
And scan it, then put it into PDF form?
No, I'm probably going to get the Audible of that one.
I
had The Deluge by him before, so I was excited.
Was it good?
We had him on. Yeah, very good. World War I era.
The next sound you'll hear is that book hitting the floor as I try and clear off my desk. In preparation for going into the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Just a reminder, this program exists because of its members. Its members make it possible for us to do a... What was that? A 40-minute conversation on a 500-page book. And that was, from my perspective, having covered all of this stuff in real time, to hear a cohesive notion of it, and to also see how the pathogen went around, and just the concept of the political implications of what happened on both right and left. It's fascinating. Not to, toot the program's horn, but, we are asking you to become a member and support it. Join themajorityreport.com. And when you do become a member, we give you extra content every single day, just about. I don't want to say anything, but join themajorityreport.com. Also, going forward, one of the benefits you'll have as a member is that when you download the app, once it gets approved, as I mentioned, we had a little bit of problem with iTunes, but once it gets approved in the next day or two, members will be able to have exclusive ability to IM the show in the fun half. Members will have exclusive ability to search the entire archive. We're talking, what are we on show now? 2000? Have we hit 2000 yet?
This will be 1930.
Show 1930. And at one point, what we're going to do is put the deep archives up there. And then it's going to be watch out. It's not going to be quite that dramatic, but... all right, so join themajorityreport.com. Also, make sure you check out the Michael Brooks Show. It happened on Tuesday. You can find it at iTunes or Stitcher or on the YouTube. Alona Minkowski was here. And check out Intifada at patreon.com/theintifada. And, of course, Matt is the only person in the office, besides Brendan, but the only person in the office who has his own podcast for the time being. God knows what Brendan's got planned. But what's happening on Literary Hangover?
Well, we just did the Scarlet Letter, which many people are saying was the best episode that anyone's listened to of any podcast. And then
ever.
Yeah, and better than Serial even, people were saying.
Wow, that's... Jeez, that's pretty good.
And as
are you consciously now adopting a Trumpian?
Yeah, exactly. That's
okay.
what I'm going for.
That's great.
That's how I can pitch things.
I gotta say, it's so smooth. I was like, wow, I gotta check that out.
Yeah, exactly.
You start to understand the power of that.
There's exactly. And for members, I'm going to start reading audiobooks into the public domain, and once I get to 100 subscribers, and on Patreon, we're hit 97 yesterday, so we're getting up there. Probably next week will be the start of my reading series, so check that out.
So now, what are you going to be doing? So these are public domain books
Yep, this one came out.
That nobody makes an audible of because why would you? You're not going to make any money off it.
Yep, and there's some LibriVox is a volunteer organization where people read them for free, but there's certain books that I think are really good that people just haven't got to because they're not, Dickens or the more famous ones. So I'm doing Catherine Maria Sedgwick's Hope Leslie, 1827, and nobody's done a reading of that. So I'm going to immortalize myself by squatting.
How many
on these
pages
books.
is it?
It's about 350. It's going to be about, I think, 14 hours.
Wow.
I'm told. Yeah. I know I need to get some tea or something to keep my vocal cords.
You're not going to do it all in one shot.
No,
I had to do FUBAR,
episodic.
and it was not easy.
Yeah, no, I've done it before before I found out about text-to-speech software. I used to try to do my readings in college, just recording myself.
And then reread the book?
And then just listen to myself, listen to the chapters, and that's just too time-consuming. So,
man.
But yeah, anyway.
What an odd duck. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. I want to get in on that. I want to immortalize myself.
I know. I'm squatting these books. There's this one and the Quaker City by George
It's not
Lippert.
like someone's going to go like, I didn't like Matt Leck's reading of the Quaker City. I'm going to take 14 hours and sit down and do it myself.
Exactly. I'll be the only show in town.
I got to pick out one that's really good. Maybe I'll do like the Constitution of the United States.
That's probably been done before.
That's probably been done before.
I think Glenn Beck did that on The Blaze.
All right. 646-257-3922. Quick break. Fun half. Bye. Oh. Folks, before we go, if you like the stories you hear on the Majority Report, then check out the Sierra Club's new storytelling podcast, The Land I Trust. Season 2 of The Land I Trust brings you 14 storytellers from across the U.S. who share their experiences in harvesting, protecting, and living with the 4 natural elements, with tales of climate change, clean energy, and everything in between. Listen to The Land I Trust at beyondcoal.org/stories or on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238 56 27 1/2 5 eighths 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I got to get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. He's done it again. Jake Tapper really. I have some theories as to what this is about. But it's pretty stunning. I mean, there's such a disconnect here. There was a story in The Intercept about the other day by David Dayen that the Koch-funded think tank linked to George Mason University is now pretending it's not part of George Mason University. And this is, of course, he's talking about the Mercatus Center, which gets most of its funding from foundations like the Koch Family Foundation. And I think the author of the page is actually listed as a, he gets paid through the Mercatus Center, but he's actually also listed as part of George Mason University. This, of course, was the contention of Elizabeth Woodley, the compliance officer at George Mason University, when asked for communications between Blauhaus Mercatus Senior Outreach Associate Jessica Pasca and members of the media. They were looking, I guess, for George Mason on like a, I don't know if it was a Freedom of Information Act or what. I guess that was under the auspices in which they were looking for this communication. Dan goes on to write, to call the Mercatus Center at George Mason University independent ignores a host of linkages between the organization and the college. The Intercept reviewed Mercatus Center's affiliation with the agreement with the university, which identifies Mercatus as a, quote, center of the university. It goes on. I mean, the point is a lot of people are scrambling. Reminds me of Dave Rubin, but let's not get distracted here.
There's George Mason's fight song.
There you go.
Fighting Austrians.
They're not a state school, are they? No. What is the but I raised the Mercatus Center because they did a report, I guess it was in the summer. It was in July, where they came out, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But I believe they basically came out and said, Medicare for All is going to cost $32 trillion over 10 years. And in the same report, they projected that over 10 years, total outlays for healthcare costs in the United States, because if it's Medicare for All, right, all the total outlays are all governmental. Oh, no, excuse me. They said Medicare for All will cost the government an extra $32 trillion or something to that effect. And total outlays, though, however, over those 10 years would be $34 trillion. The numbers, I haven't looked at the report. That was basically the dynamic. And the idea of Medicare for All is that there is no private outlays for health insurance. Now, it's possible at the margins you may have wealthier people saying like, oh, well, I want to get extra healthcare benefits, which is fine. But it's also, that's nominal, right? We're not talking a lot of people. At most we'd be talking maybe 10% people. I don't know. And so in the end, society would save $2 trillion. It may be made up in the private sector by paying taxes, but if you're paying $5 in taxes and you're saving $6 in healthcare costs, anybody who knows math would pay the $5. So Jake Tapper made that point, I guess, a couple months ago, and then was shot down, and the Mercatus research paper was shot down. That's why I think people still have such interest in this outfit. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on CNN State of the Union show with Jake Tapper. I guess is like was this yesterday or a couple
Sunday
days?
show.
Sunday show. And this is the game. Let's scrutinize AOC, the most scrutinized candidate, sure to win candidate for a congressional seat probably in the country, which is fine. Certainly, she's gotten a lot of good press too in earned media. I would be fascinated to see this level of inquisition of other congressional candidates, but this is good. And here is Jake Tapper. Listen to his questions here, and then we'll talk about his premise.
Right. No, I get that. But the price tag for everything that you've laid out in your campaign is $40 trillion
Pause it.
over the
Now,
next 10
everything that she's laid out in her campaign, Medicare for all, free college option in each state, expand Social Security, paid family leave, and what was the last?
Work guarantee.
Work guarantee.
Job guarantee.
I think she has she? And also student debt relief. So here he goes.
You've laid out in your campaign is $40 trillion over the next 10 years. I understand that Medicare for all would cost more to some wealthier people and to the government and to taxpayers while also reducing individual healthcare expenditures. But I'm talking about the overall package. You say it's not pie in the sky, but $40 trillion is quite a bit of money. And the taxes that you talked about raising to pay for this, to pay for your agenda, only count for 2. And we're going by left-leaning analysts.
Right. Well, when you look again at how our healthcare works, currently we pay much of these costs go into the private sector. So what we see is, for example, a year ago, I was working downtown in a restaurant. I went around and I asked how many of you folks have health insurance. Not a single person did, because they would have had to have paid $200 a month for a payment for insurance that had an $8,000 deductible. What these represent are lower costs overall for these programs. And additionally, what this is a broader agenda. We do know and we acknowledge that there are political realities. They don't always happen with just the wave of a wand, but we can work to make these things happen. And in fact, when you look at the economic activity that it spurs, for example, if you look at my generation, millennials, the amount of economic activity that we do not engage in, the fact that we delay purchasing homes, that we don't participate in the economy and purchasing cars, etc., as fully as possible, is a cost. It is an externality, if you will, of unprecedented amounts of student loan debt.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get an answer for the other $38 trillion, but we'll have you back and maybe we can go over that.
Okay. Well, actually, you do have an answer. You had the answer before you asked the question. In fact, it was embedded in the question. When Jake Tapper sort of like on the side, like, I know that, the taxes are going to be paid and that the private costs are going to be, are going to come back. Okay. What he was saying there is that I know that the net benefit over 10 years to society is a savings of $2 trillion, right? So they had this graphic up there, the Democratic Socialist price tag, 40 plus trillion in new proposals over the next decade, $32 trillion, Medicare for all. Now, again, where did they get this number? Oh, wait a second. If I squint, I can see at the bottom, Institute, George Mason University. Oh, Mercatus. Well, which is also funny because we thought they were completely independent. So there's the George Mason University Mercatus Institute figure, $32 trillion. That should really read negative $2 trillion. In terms of the price tag to society, it's going to save $2 trillion. Now, yes, wealthier people are going to bear more of the brunt of that cost than if we do it the way we're doing it now, when poorer people will bear the brunt of that cost. And that's a political choice that we can make. We can either make the choice that we shouldn't have runaway wealth inequality, and we should ensure that everyone has access to health care and it doesn't bankrupt people, et cetera, or not. That's a political choice. But in terms of math, if we're talking about math, that first number should say negative $2 trillion. And then she says $5.4 trillion on a job guarantee. We also know that people are talking about infrastructure expenditure and whatnot. Well, much of that money would come from that.
And those jobs guaranteed, they'd be paying taxes on that income too.
And they'd be paying taxes on that income too. So that $5.4 trillion is not a net cost. $1.4 trillion on student loans. She made the point in that is that that is mitigated. Now, maybe if you basically tomorrow said, okay, nobody owns those loans, you would see an increase in expenditure that would go to the private sector. And it would go to people who will spend that money. It's like a big stimulus package. Now, yes, the question is, will that generate enough income to make up? Maybe, maybe not. Let's say it only does like $500 billion. So we're $1 trillion shy. The job guarantee, people are going to pay taxes. You're going to get infrastructure investment that you were going to expend anyways. And the $1.3 trillion on free college, paid family leave, and Social Security expansion. Social Security expansion comes from raising the payroll taxes, the threshold in which you have to continue to pay into it. And free college, of course, is going to free up people to expend money that they haven't taken out more loans on college, and will have a long-term positive effect for the economy, in addition to driving down probably prices for all colleges because you now have a low-cost option. And we know that one of the drivers of all college tuition has been the raising of public universities' costs. So it's a completely disingenuous question. On top of which, so the number's not 40 trillion, maybe it's 2 trillion. Maybe it's 3 trillion. Where are you going to get these $2 or $3 trillion? Well, you could roll back the Trump tax cuts as a starter. That would just get you, I think, probably $2.7 trillion down the road.
You could have just tacked it on to the military spending bill that Democrats all voted for besides Bernie. Well,
not just the $17 billion, but the $70 billion that we saw last year. I mean, there's plenty of ways of getting this money. No one asked where the money from the tax cut came. It was all deficit spending. Now, personally, I have no problem with that. But even on his terms, he's being disingenuous. Why would Jake Tapper do this? Because Jake Tapper doesn't just stick it to the president. He sticks it to everybody. It's just that when he has to stick it to AOC in this instance, he has to get a little fuzzy on his math. That's all. That's all. It's a little fuzzy. But it works, I guess, for him. Let's go to the phone. Oh, I haven't even called in yet. Pardon me. I will launch the Iams here. In the meantime, let's put this up. Donald Trump was down in... where was he? Was he in South Carolina at this point?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. And this was released by the White House press pool. We will see video of this. I would have to guess at one point. We don't have it yet. But Trump is walking around North Carolina. I don't know. Do we know exactly where this was? I don't even know if this is the White House press pool. I think this was local.
The tweet I saw this from had a peg to the press pool.
Okay. Trump crossed the street to a small brick house where he stopped to greet an older man in the T-shirt. Behind the house, a large yacht had washed ashore and was shipwrecked against the wooden deck. It's the wooden deck of the house, right? Trump gazed at the yacht saying, "Is this your boat?" The owner of the house said no. Trump turned and replied with a smile, "At least you got a nice boat out of the deal." Speaking to reporters, Trump said the owner told him his insurance company didn't want to pay for the damage to his home. Quote, "We're going to find out," he said. "We're going to find out the name of the insurance company." I think it's incredible what we're seeing, the president added. This boat just came here. They don't know whose boat it is, he said. What's the law? Maybe it becomes theirs.
Are we sure this was a pool report? Was it from the New York Times reporter? It was in New Bern, North Carolina. Are we sure this wasn't Anthony Atamaniak, though? Like,
right.
I mean, season 2.
Unbelievable. Completely nuts. Completely nuts. Let's see here. Let's go. Did I call in? What happened? There we go.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
646-257-3920 is the number. Let's go first to an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. What's on your mind, Josh?
First of all, I'm going to make you jealous, Sam. I'm going to the game tonight, baseball game.
You son
Red Sox, Yankees.
You bastard.
I know, I suck.
What are we, you, Josh from Chicago, going to the Yankees game? All right.
I know. I wanted to talk about something. You guys have been mentioning, I hate to bring up old wound, but you've been talking about Jimmy Dore recently. And I think I just wanted to say the thing that bothers me is that, like, one of the things he doesn't talk about in his insane videos, which also, by the way, Tim Canova plugged Jimmy Dore as someone who's like the leading progressive voice. So it's really disturbing to see Tim Canova become a crazy person. But is like he doesn't talk about organizing at all, or like any like way to like organize or actually build power. Like not even like just outside of electoral politics, but like just like organizing, for example, whether it be like organizing for a national $15 minimum wage or any of this stuff. He has no clue about that. And he doesn't even have it seems like a clue about like building movements. And so I think it's, for me, instead he just relies on sort of these outrageous conspiracy things, which remind me of Alex Jones in a weird way. And yeah, I think that's, for me, the frustrating thing. And you see him actually influence people who are on the left who are maybe just looking for someone who spouts their ideas, like free healthcare, like Medicare for all, or free public college. And you see, like, he says this stuff, and so then it's like, oh, here's this guy saying this stuff. This guy must be onto something, or this guy must be saying the truth. And so I can almost see how he's able to sucker people into following him in a way, who are like legitimate leftists.
All right, I will say this: like, I'm not going to criticize him for the first part. That's just a matter of taste. Like, different shows do different things. That's fine. I mean, honestly, like he, and I don't even have a problem with how people say like you just don't like him because he's emotional. I have no problem with that. I mean, yeah. It may not be what I want to watch, or I do, or I don't. At different times, I have, like a big fan of Mike Malloy, for instance, who, back in the day. But the problem I have is just that the guy is, everything for him is just too performative. And it doesn't, on top of the conspiracy stuff, on top of the fundamental lack of knowledge and his laziness that comes across, right? And the idea, obviously the Supreme Court stuff that we had in our debate 2 years ago, all of this should come as a complete surprise to him about what's happening with the Supreme Court. I don't know. Someone sent me a video of his, and I've only watched a little bit, but apparently he's mad at AOC for saying something positive of Cuomo at this point. And it's like, the race is over, and he's the nominee, and her political power, if you're interested in her having more power, at this moment is enhanced by her not actively feuding with a guy who's going to get elected governor. There is no point to it. It is a complete waste of political power that is much better spent in other ways. And it's not just because you piss off. Like, look, Andrew Cuomo is not going around going like, oh, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's nice to me. I like her. We're not in junior high here. He knows that she is a political rival of his. But the point is that when 60%, 65% of the Democratic Party and however many percent of New Yorkers are going to vote to reelect Andrew Cuomo, you as AOC don't want to alienate those people because you want those people. There's no reason for you to do that. It would be political malpractice. It would be a disservice to every issue that she cares about. And to criticize her about that is to dumb down your audience and basically tell them everything you think is important is not important. And I'm going to highlight the least important things, in fact, detrimental things to achieving what you want to achieve. So I don't begrudge him not, talking about organizing this or that or whatnot or any of that stuff. It's just like to put out such stupidity that is counterproductive to the issue set that you supposedly want is just all you're doing is performing. And in that respect, like that is, where he's, and some of the conspiracy stuff is where he's similar to an Alex Jones. But appreciate the call, Josh.
Cheers.
Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Tim, this is Ronald Reagan.
It's Sam. Did you call me Tim?
Yeah, is this Tim?
No, this is Sam.
I said Sam.
Oh, okay. Hello, Ronald Reagan.
Hey, two things. Well, three things. One, the real tragedy of Jimmy Dore is that his show used to be like really fucking good. And I listen to it all the time. And if you go back and listen to his show from like 2012, he had some really good writers, and they did a lot of really good content. So RIP, the Jimmy Dore show. You mentioned earlier the Sierra Club, right?
Yeah, I did. Twice.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you a story about the Sierra Club.
Okay, this should be great.
So the last time I saw my now dead grandfather, it was a couple years ago. He was like 95, and he was a World War II vet. He was a logger for a lot of years in Oregon, and kind of like an actual cowboy, like one of these guys who rode horses into the mountains and did cowboy stuff. Had like really deep roots in Oregon, and the last time I saw him, he was just telling me war stories and all this stuff, and started talking about logging. And he told me to like lean in. This is a true story. And he said, I need you to promise me something. And I said, okay. And he said, don't you ever give money to the Sierra Club. So this is I give money to the Nature Conservancy now, but that was his dying wish. I guess he had hurt feelings about the spotted owl or something like that. So
well, let me ask you this: Did he ever say, "Don't ever listen to one of the Sierra Club's podcasts"?
Yeah. After that, he was like, "And those motherfuckers have podcasts too. I don't want you listening to that shit either."
All right.
Those were his actual last words.
Oh, well, then I'm sorry. You're out of luck.
I'm in a real tight spot.
Yeah.
No, he didn't say that, but he did make me promise not to give them money. How do you feel about like when somebody dies, if they've made you, swear to some stupid thing like that? I mean, I can give them money, right?
Yeah. No, you have to follow what they say.
Matt says
you have to follow what they'll say, or that you'll be cursed.
What did no. Did he specifically say you'd be cursed, or was it just like, do me a favor or promise me? I mean, he has to say.
It was just promise me.
No. I
you
mean, listen.
Ghostly
you break promises
threats,
all the time, don't you? Right? You break promises all the time.
Yeah. Plus, he's dead, so I mean,
right.
What's he gonna do? Right?
Exactly.
I wanted to give a shout out real quick to Literary Hangover. If there's people not listening, they should. Matt said that the Scarlet Letter, if it were renamed today, might be called Revenge of a Cuck, which I think it's the kind of MR sort of spin on English literature that people are hungry for. But it's actually really, really good, so people should listen to that.
There you go.
And one last... Yeah, there you go.
Some Mario Kart.
Do the Reagan thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I got one last story for you. So,
sure.
A few months ago, the Supreme Court. So, when you put an immigrant in deportation proceedings or removal proceedings, they're called, you have to serve them with a document that's called a notice to appear. And the statute says that the notice to appear has to include a list of very specific things, including the location, date, and time of the first hearing. So it's kind of a due process type requirement. So ICE, since forever, put to be determined on there because they don't want to have to call the court and schedule a hearing. So what they do is they just put to be determined. They mail the notice to appear to the court, and then the court sends a hearing notice. Well, so the Supreme Court earlier this year, they issued a decision 8-1 saying, look, the statute says you have to put a date and a time of a hearing. You can't just put to be determined. This is just it's a basic law school stuff, right? Plain meaning of the statute. And so there was some talk early on, according to some FOIAs, about coordinating with the immigration courts. It's a pretty simple system that they would just have to implement. And instead, what they've decided to do, these are our friends over at ICE, is to just invent hearing dates and to put a random made-up time and date. Sometimes they'll put midnight on a weekend, or they'll put during actual business hours of the immigration courts. So people are being placed in removal proceedings and given this document that says, you have to appear in Dallas, Texas, or Seattle, Washington on September 26th at 8 a.m. And if you don't, by the way, there's all the warnings, you're going to be ordered removed and whatever. And because the immigration courts are pretty spread out, it's not like there's one in every county or one in, every so often. For example, in Washington, people have to go to Seattle no matter where they live, even if they're in, Spokane or Walla Walla, really far away. So people are now driving 5-6 hours to go to a court that when they arrive at the court says, well, we don't have any of your information even in our system, and you definitely don't have court today. And so I think it sort of perfectly illustrates what a dumb agency they are, that they thought that this would be a form of complying with what the Supreme, first of all, with the law, and second of all, with what the Supreme Court says they need to be doing.
Okay, so there's this Pierre case. So who has this been tested, though? I mean, has someone gone after ICE has done this to, how does this practice end?
Well, so there was a whole question of whether or not any of these notices to appear actually vest jurisdiction with the immigration court, because the statute also says that in order for jurisdiction to vest with the court, a proper notice to appear has to be filed with the court. Well, the Supreme Court clearly said this is not a proper notice to appear.
Right.
Now, so a bunch of people started filing motions to terminate. This court doesn't have jurisdiction. There's no notice to appear. And immigration judges, some were granting, some were denying the motions. Now, the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is basically under the jurisdiction of Jeff Sessions, recently issued a decision saying, no, the jurisdiction still vests. even if there's no date and time. So this is going to ultimately be trickling up to the circuit courts, and then probably will be back at the Supreme Court. But, and ICE tried to argue at the Supreme Court, like, well, this is going to affect a lot of cases because we do this all the time. And the Supreme Court was like, well, yeah, but it's the law. You're not following the law, and it doesn't really matter. Like,
right? Go lobby Congress, get them to change it.
Right, and the real problem is now that their sort of proposed fix or end around is just causing like massive, logistical issues. Like the court, and they'll use the same date and time, so they'll submit a notice to appear to like 50 people, and they'll give them all the same fake hearing date. And so the immigration court in Seattle will have one day 50 random people showing up from like all over the state saying, Jesus. I've got this document saying I've got court today, and the clerks are just like, yeah, it's wrong. Go home. And so ICE is dumb. I think that's the takeaway. And we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, it's really incredible how dumb things are right now. And Jeff Sessions keeps certifying these cases to himself. So he's reshaping the immigration courts and the power that the judges have to exercise discretion or terminate cases in certain postures. And they're really trying to turn the judges into basically like form adjudicators. So like a normal asylum hearing might normally take 3 or 4 hours, and they're now scheduling them for like hour or half-hour slots. And
there's an all-on.
Anyways,
all right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there seems to be a pattern to me that when Jeff Sessions gets attacked by Donald Trump, and let's play this clip. But I appreciate the call, Ronald Reagan, and the update on this. When Jeff Sessions gets attacked by the president, he then leans in and it either reminds him like, oh, I only have a certain amount of time to continue my white nationalist agenda. Or it reminds him like, oh, I've got to deepen my ties within the administration so that Stephen Miller can continue to argue on my behalf by delivering more stuff for him. Jeff Sessions just basically argued that I don't know if he has the ability. I would imagine he may. He said that he might overturn a Board of Immigration Appeals precedent by basically ignoring the ability of asylum seekers to get bond. So there's a ruling by a Board of Immigration Appeals that argues that immigration judges have the power to release certain detained migrants on bond. Okay, these people are coming in. They have an asylum hearing scheduled. The judge says, okay, you're obviously, we have you in the system. It's not like you're going to leave the country. You're here seeking asylum. So come back in 6 weeks or whatever it is and have your hearing, or 2 months or 3 months or 5 months or 6 months, or we're very backlogged now. Come back and so we'll let you out on bond. Well, he may overturn that ruling. Sessions may. So asylum applicants who have passed what is known as a credible fear interview, right, where it's like a prima facie reason for them to be seeking asylum. They threatened my daughter. They killed my husband. And if I go back there, here is evidence that they're going to either kill me, prosecute me, or torture me. Even those people would face indefinite detention. So this is, Jeff Sessions continuing. Like, we're going to terrorize these people. We're going to make it as hard as possible on them. We're going to separate them from their children. We're going to kidnap their children. We're going to detain them for as long as possible. Meanwhile, here on Lou Dobbs tonight, Jane Pirro says Jeff Sessions is working against Donald Trump. Odd that he was the first senator to come out and support him, but
your judgment about Sessions. Is he compromised or is he just mentally incompetent?
Well, look, all I know is this guy was in the Senate for 20 years. He didn't do anything but pass, I think he sponsored 4 or 5 laws that were passed. It's absurd. One is to name a commission for Andrew Jackson, or one of them, I don't remember. But look, the bottom line is this. Jeff Sessions is a front for those individuals who would suffer Leavenworth if their actions, if they were made accountable for what they've done.
What are you talking about?
What is she talking about?
She means that Sessions is covering for like the deep state actors like Strzok and stuff.
Because
he's part of the that's the question. Is he just dumb or is he?
He's part of the nouveau deep state.
Yeah. It's a pretty intense conspiracy.
But as this dynamic happens, every time Jeff Sessions is getting more pressure from the president, he then makes our immigration system that much more draconian and creates that much more suffering. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 928 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's New Japan Pro Wrestling. How's it going, Sam?
It's what?
NJPW, Sam.
Oh, what's happening?
Oh, not much. Is Matt's in the building? No, Michael?
Michael is out. Michael is out.
Oh, okay. Matt, can you serve as sort of a ghetto translator for my call? Do you mind?
I'll attempt. I'll do my best.
Matt's from North
All right,
Dakota.
thank
I'm
you.
from
So-
New Jersey, but go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you're from Jersey? Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I got an issue, man. I got an issue, Sam. I got an issue with this motherfucker Jimmy Dore, man. You know?
What's going on with Jimmy Dore? Why are we getting all these calls
It's
about?
because, man. I mean, the bottom line is, Sam. I was up last night. You know what I'm saying, whipping that work. You know what I'm saying, chopping up that Ray Liotta. You know what I mean, and he got the nerve to have AOC's name in his mouth, man. And I didn't appreciate that. The reason why I didn't appreciate it is, for one, okay, you already talked about how, you can't just go against the party, especially when, we can't have that voting third party and all that other bullshit going on right now. We cannot have that, okay? But secondly, this the same motherfucker who said he would team up with Mike Cernovich, man?
Right.
Rapist Mike Cernovich?
Well, that's because Mike Cernovich is a well-known anti-war advocate. No
Sam,
kidding.
fuck that motherfucker, man. For real. And it's just like, I mean, it's like AOC said the other day, get used to me slaying. You know what I'm saying? Well, I'm going to say this. I know you don't want no calls from Jimmy, but get used to me slaying Jimmy Dore, Sam. You know what I'm saying? I don't appreciate his rhetoric. I don't appreciate his bull. And Matt, let me ask you a question. Matt, you there?
Yep.
All right. You a fan of Blade Runner 2049?
I saw it in theaters. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, well, you know about the prequel, right? Fade Runner 2018, starring me. I'm lining up any Jimmy Dore fans who want to see me, Midtown Manhattan, 63rd and 9th. Okay? No. We not fucking with Jimmy Dore. I told you he had Yakubian tendencies. They're coming out right now. Okay? And that's that. Fuck Jimmy Dore and anybody that love him. Thank you for taking my call, Sam. Loved you in Spin City and Sex in the City, man.
Oh, well,
Have
thanks.
a great day.
What about the show?
I think Jimmy Dore must be really afraid of people like AOC because they sort of disprove his entire thing. So it's interesting to look back at his old videos, like AOC is going to primary, and he's like sort of like with them for a little bit, and then it's like one moment to be like, oh, well, this is fundamentally against everything I've been saying.
It disproves his theory, right? Which is that you cannot reform the Democratic Party by being part of the Democratic Party. She is, now where she ultimately may end up, I mean, I I think she's going to stay in the Democratic Party and build a caucus within the Democratic Party. And hopefully, I mean, maybe in 20 years, she'll be majority leader.
Do you see?
Maybe she'll be vice president. I mean, who knows? But
do you see this being a new theme for Jimmy Dore on his show, where he just picks apart the class of 2018 voting record for when they're not voting in the most progressive bills?
Who knows? I have no idea.
He has to be careful, though, because he doesn't want to alienate people who are like, AOC supporters.
Yeah, maybe. Vespa. Do you know why YouTube has purged so many subs from the MR page? Is that right? It's like the Republicans purging voter databases out here. Any word on who you're debating at Politicon yet? Just 1 month left. Out. Left is best. I don't have word about to give anybody on Politicon at this moment. Are we getting subs purged?
I don't think so. I mean, we might have. I haven't checked today.
It looks like it's gone up since I last checked on Monday.
How much is it today?
We're at 392.
Oh, I think we were at 393.
Yeah, we might have lost. They do that periodically. Every like once or twice a year, we'll lose 2,000 subs a day.
Whatever. Jonathan Armstead. Sam, should liberals and progressives do a better job of carrying out their ideologies on a personal level in the workplace? I haven't IM'd in a while because I was working a digital marketing role with a local, large, well-known nonprofit that didn't have Wi-Fi. My suggestion on improving process was shut down as I was told, this is how we've always done it. I was frequently told to drop whatever I was doing because large donors had made requests and messages needed to be sent out ASAP. Lastly, I was the only African-American man in the organization of over 100 people. I commented to a coworker that VP seemed out of touch and racially insensitive and was told, but she was a Hillary supporter. What? Do you think this is everywhere? People who value one set of politics in public and not doing in their office as managers? I mean, I think there is some of that. I mean, I don't know what you're asking. I mean, I think, like, look, there's been a lot of reporting as of late of, like, problems that the Democratic Party has in terms of inclusiveness. I think look, if you're working with digital marketing role with a well-known nonprofit that doesn't have Wi-Fi, that's insane. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. That sounds like just rank incompetence. But
it's inspiring.
Institutionally, there are problems, but if you're asking me, like, should you quit? I would say only if you have a good job to go to. I'm not sure what you're asking. Do I think this is everywhere? I don't think it's everywhere. Random Door. Any plans to talk to Jimmy Dore? What's going on? He's telling people 2 months before the midterms, AOC, Sanders, Gillum, Booker are corrupt and we should vote for the Green Party. He's getting beyond. Oh, he's really. We got to look at that video, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Can we please have Fat Nixon? Can we please have Donald Trump and Muslim Obama constitutional audiobooks, please? Oh, that would actually be pretty funny. Sean, just a quick observation. The GOP as a whole has become the living embodiment of Nathan Thurm. Ghastly. Geo Mason is okay. George Mason's a public university. To be fair, there are better environmental orgs than Sierra Club to give money to. Frack-free Four Corners, for example. Max in Phoenix. Why is the color red used to represent Republicans there? It usually represents communism around the world. What's the story on this? I don't know. That was like something new that happened like in the late aughts. I don't remember that as a kid.
What, the red thing?
Yeah. I mean, the early aughts, the red-blue thing. I don't remember that.
Republicans weren't red in like the 60s?
They may have been, but I just don't remember people talking about it very
If it's
much.
been since like Lincoln, it sort of makes sense from like a radical Republican standpoint, but who knows?
I don't know either. Banks are the robbers. Fundamental point for everything human, especially politics. We are emotional creatures, not rational, whose deep emotional needs run largely below our awareness, like an iceberg. Long-term, regular self-reflection is required for awareness of why we feel what we feel. do what we do and what we believe. To do so requires courage and a willingness to be uncomfortable emotionally. I'm uncomfortable just with reading that. Jeff from Regina. I think Jake Tapper will ask the senators that voted for the defense spending how they plan to pay for it. Of course not. Doe. I'm almost 74. I spend so much time talking to insurance companies, doctors, hospitals, setting up payment plans, trying to get reimbursed. Tons of overwhelming paperwork is depressing. When you have the most medical issues at this age, there's no way to spend retirement. I'm a nurse who knows my way through the medical maze, but I still have to be very assertive to get response to get things resolved. I'm lucky. Mine is only one story. Thank God for Medicare, but I'm still out of pocket a lot. Medicare for all. Trump change. How do you sell national health care to people whose health care is presently paid for by their employer? Do we compel employers to pass their cost savings to the employees who would be paying higher taxes? Seems like we should tax businesses for the health care directly and leave personal income alone. You know, there's a lot of talk about this. I mean, I think the idea is that you do these things slowly. You drop, the age of Medicare eligibility. You roll it in. Bernie's plan talks about this to a certain extent. I think the idea is you also will get business owners on board. And as soon as those business owners are, I think you either have the business owners play that what they're paying in healthcare premiums to taxes, which is still going to save them money because they're not going to have to pay somebody to administer all this stuff. I think it's one of the challenges is to convert people from that system. I think as older people die out, you're going to see less of a problem with that, frankly. As a younger generation takes hold. Calling from an 831 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 831? 831?
Hello?
Hello?
Hey, this is Victor calling from Davis.
From Davis,
California.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to call in because I think you guys are being unfair to Charles Murray. I'm just fucking around like Charles Murray. I was calling in about the interview you guys had today. I thought it was really good, and I wanted to bring up a point. Do you think leftists should push to redo the FDR notion that that the government should pay for bankers when they go broke? You know what I'm talking about?
No. That government should pay for bankers when they go broke? You mean banks?
Yeah, when banks go under, it's like backed up by federal money.
Right. The FDIC, is that what you're talking about? What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. Do I think that we shouldn't have the FDIC?
Yeah. Do you think that we should let the bankers die at their own sword of capitalism? We kind of bail them out, and it's like socialism for them.
Well, I mean, I'm not 100% sure I follow exactly what you're talking about. I mean, we bailed out the banks in this crisis in the same way that if you deposit $250,000 in the bank, right, up to $250,000 in the bank, and the bank goes bankrupt, your money's protected. Your money's insured. Okay? The bailout for the banks is obviously not the same thing, but the theory behind it is that if this bank goes under, if Citibank was to go under, when it did, I mean, that's why I don't have a problem with some of the bailouts for the banks. I just think that more should have been done directly to the homeowners. And we should have, for every dollar that we put in there, we should have gotten an interest in the bank. Like it's basically how it works. We're going to bail you out with cash. We should be getting ownership. So I don't have a problem per se with the money that we paid out as much as what we got in return for it. I think rather than simply saying we're not going to bail out these big banks, we should say you're not allowed to be a big bank.
All right, that makes sense. I also just wanted to add that I'm a former libertarian, and watching your debates with libertarians pushed me to actually debate them myself. And back in my community college, there's a libertarian and Republicans club, and holy shit, is it easy to debate libertarians. It's quite embarrassing.
Don't ruin my secret. I appreciate the call, Victor.
All right, thanks, guys. Good show.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't want anybody to know too.
It actually takes a lot of study.
It takes a lot of study. You got a lot of study. And it's one thing if
I haven't
you
figured it out yet.
Calling from a 501 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Matthew from Arkansas.
Hello, Matthew. What's on your mind?
Hi, I was just calling to ask. I saw some reports with Nancy Pelosi saying how she thought people who opposed her were sexist and ageist. And so my question is that do you think people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy, do you think they live in a bubble where they don't know that what they propose is bad and horrible and ineffective, or do you think they know that and they just don't care because they're so secure in their position?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't paint with such a broad brush. I mean, I think that the Nancy Pelosi, I think, is clearly in a bubble when she starts talking about PAYGO, right? You know what I mean by that, right? PAYGO?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's no constituency for it. And the Republicans have clearly proven that, even their constituents don't care about deficit spending. And so I think that's a function of having a bit of a tin ear, maybe being in a bubble of leadership for too long. I think with a guy like Chuck Schumer, I think, frankly, he's just in over his head. I think it's a competency question that he is not suited to being a leader of the Senate and is being outplayed. We're not living in a particularly ideological time in terms of or I should say, let me reverse that. We're not living in a particularly legislative period on the left or the right. The Republicans haven't been able to do much of anything legislatively short of lowering taxes for rich people. But it really, in the Senate in particular, we're just watching the failure of Chuck Schumer to sort of strategize, and even from a tactical standpoint. So I don't know. I'm sure there are some critics of Nancy Pelosi who are misogynist and ageist. But in terms of the critique that she's getting from the left, I think it's, indicative. I think it's a function of stuff like her coming out for PAYGO, which is just a joke. It's just a joke.
Okay, I understand what you're saying then. Oh, thank you. And then my other question is, what do you think it would take for a progressive to get in the Senate or the House and take Nancy or Chuck's place?
Well, I think in the Senate it's going to be tricky because things don't change that much in the Senate. In the House, I think it's conceivable, but I haven't heard of anybody who is, I think, arguably to Nancy Pelosi's left who has said that they're interested in the position. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's you need somebody who's been in there for a while. You got to look at the Progressive Caucus and see if someone steps up. I haven't seen anybody do that, but appreciate the call. We definitely have a crisis of leadership in the Democratic Party. There's no doubt about it. And in many respects, it's going to take, I think, someone at the top of the ticket who is really leaning in to usher in a different era of leadership in the Democratic Party. All right, I don't have too much time, but let's James O'Keefe apparently has crawled out of his hole and desperately looking for something for relevance. And look, this is dangerous. When you're in a situation where you are trying to convince donors that it's worthwhile, sometimes you do things that you really, really regret. Now, try and think of what would be the sort of like the most outlandish claim. Would it be something like there are 20-something-year-olds who have low-level jobs at a government agency and belong to the DSA and they represent the deep state? Well, yes.
Deep State Association?
The Deep State Association? Holy cow, you just broke it open. I'm surprised he didn't. Now, I know you would think like, oh, that's the most pathetic. That would be the biggest indicator of total patheticness and desperation. Well, you'd be 1/4 right. Because the other 3/4 would be when you promo this video to make it seem, in your desperation to make it seem like you've actually uncovered something, you would dress up like McGruff, the crime dog, and walk around and take pictures of yourself in Washington, D.C. Here is James O'Keefe doing that very thing at the beginning of this new blockbuster video that shows that Deep State Association members are in the deep state. Whoa! Wait a second. Whoa. Can we see that in slow-mo? Because he sped it up and it's too... Let's just see it in slow-mo for a second. Because I love how he like tips his sunglasses. And he's wearing a raincoat in the middle of the sun. That would be a big tip-off that he may be an undercover.
I'm like, wait, is that guy following me with the newspaper with the 2 holes cut out for his eyes?
Exactly. Let's watch this again in slow-mo. This is the best part of the whole video. There he is. He's standing in the middle of the... Oh, wait. Slow. We go back. Somebody comes by and tries to hit him.
Tries to take his hat off.
They couldn't. Wait, try that again. Then the guy tries to grab his hat. He's sitting there holding up the newspaper. U.S. Accountability Office. Wow. And look at that. It's an ad that he pretends to have in his newspaper. I wonder how much that cost his donors.
He's blown his cover there holding that.
Totally. All right, so let's go to the real scandal, folks. There are some 20-something-year-olds who hang out in a bar, and they are members of both the DSA and the Deep State Association working at the GOA. Here we go.
It's a socialist organization, and we want to, destroy capitalism.
Yeah. Deep State Unmasked.
I am a government auditor, right? So I work for the Government Accountability Office. Everyone in my office who's close to me now not only knows that I'm a socialist, knows that I'm in DSA. And I try not to...
They do know or they don't know?
They do know.
Okay.
A lot of people know. Management does not know. You have to be strategic about things like that.
He is an avowed communist and a committed member of DSA.
Like communists know, prefix, and that's basically me. We have some folks who are like Trotskyists or Marxists.
I have informed them. I filed all the paperwork I needed to file.
Yeah.
I was purposely a little bit vague about what kind of organization it was. Mm-hmm. I'm like, it's a community organization. We do this, we do that. I wasn't like, it's a socialist organization and we want to, destroy capitalism.
So when you're at work, can you do DSA stuff too? Like when you're actually in the office?
Can is a weird question, right? I would get fired if they knew that I was, and I do. Technically, everything I'm doing with DSA is stuff I'm not supposed to be doing for work. So like...
What do you mean?
Like, it's explicitly prohibited. So like, if they find out, I could get in trouble, basically.
So like, is there a specific law that says like, that you would be violating if, like, that you're involved with DSA?
Now, is this guy like, is she going out on dates with him? Is that what's going on here?
Well, I'm not sure if this is the guy, but the woman who tried to entrap I think it was Washington Post journalist in the Roy Moore thing, remember her?
Yeah.
I think she has been involved in this project too, and apparently may have made out with a DSA member, and then he realized who she was like a few days later. I'm not sure if that's this guy. It could be.
Is it only just this guy in this video?
In this video, it is. Yeah.
Just this one dude who's like a 20-something auditor going on dates with this girl.
In the GAO.
Wow.
We better hope James O'Keefe doesn't get into this office.
That dude's got like a multi-million-dollar budget. Did you know that?
Yeah.
He raises multi-million-dollar. Let's play the video again. The slow-mo, yeah. I wonder you send this to your donors and you're like, look what I've done. Smack. Boom. Honestly, let's just keep this up there. Like this is like how you like. I want to say incel, but I don't want to criticize. Like like the guy, the grown man, right? Because he's a grown man now, right? He's like in his 30s.
He's definitely older than I am.
This guy, how does he look at the video of this as he's in the edit bay and goes, "Yeah, bingo, nailed it."
He just looks at his bank account.
Oh, play it back with this. Play it back with this song. Please, go back to the beginning of the video. This is going to be good. Let's see this. This is good. Oh, my God. Oh, there it is.
So cool.
Oh my God, he's so cool. I love that video. Hey, is there any chance that we could actually run that twice in this package, do you think? Or is that too much? Well, how about we just put this at the beginning of all the videos that we put out from now on? Because I think it looks pretty cool. Like it looks like...
I find it amazing that they still he couldn't stand there long enough without someone like messing with him while he's standing in the bike lane. They're like, well, this is the best we got.
Or just remove that frame.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's almost like a cry from help from the editor. Like where the editor is basically saying, I just want to put this in there because they're all sitting in the edit bay. And he's like, yeah, no, I want that in. And they're like, so you want the part? Do you want the part with you with the sunglasses, like doing that? Like, yeah, no, we got to have that in. I paid for the newsprint that has Project Veritas.
That was a $450 trench coat.
Yeah, I mean, we got to keep that in. Isn't that cool though, guys? Sure it is. Yeah, no, it's cool.
They check their bank accounts to make sure the checks are still clearing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's cool. It's totally cool.
Totally cool. I got this gig editing stuff, and I got to do this for this guy. It's whatever. I mean, it just. Listen, he lives out in Connecticut somewhere, and it's like, this guy is just going like, it's either this or I got to go back to doing fucking wedding videos.
I've got a few friends that do freelance video editing, and I would just love it if they took a gig like this.
I want to put this out there. If you are an editor who works on Project Veritas videos, freelance.
We have a new project called Veritas.
Exactly. Super Veritas. There you go. All right, we got to wrap up in like 5 minutes. Calling from a 469 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, Sam.
Yeah.
Hello? This is Cole from Texas. I'm also Mark's Refactory on. Hello?
Hello. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Cole from Texas.
Yes. Hey, sorry. So I was calling because I saw one of your scripts. I mean, you wrote an article about one of the script that you were trying to produce as a movie that you end up not doing with Joe Lieberman shooting a rocket to a.
Oh no! You read about? Oh wow, that's an old piece. I think I wrote that 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that movie was made, and it exists.
It does?
Yes, it does. Go to Pilot Seasons. PilotSeasonDVDs.com. PilotSeasonDVDs.com.
Oh man, but hey man, thanks for you guys, man. You guys are really doing great. I mean, I really appreciate the show. You guys have helped me out a lot in my philosophy class. I mean, you're able to break down a lot of the theoretical stuff and how it applies in today's political realm, and I really appreciate you guys. And hey, I got a quick question. You and Mark Maron, are you guys still like friends, or you guys aren't friends anymore?
No, yes, we're friends. We're friends. We are still friends.
Okay. Can you invite him on the show?
No.
I think that would be great.
No, I wouldn't do that.
No.
No. Why would I do that?
Why not? Oh, I'm just asking.
Mark is, I think Mark is hesitant to, like, he I think, like, being around, talking about politics just gets into his head too much. I mean, I think he's like, he's been a little bit political, you know, in the Trump era on his show, and I think he doesn't want to do that. I mean, he's still a political person, I think, you know, when he does stand up, but I think he doesn't feel comfortable putting that foot forward. I think he associates it with some difficult times in his life, I think.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But feel free to harass him on Twitter about it.
You said what?
Feel free to harass him about about it on Twitter.
I will. I have done that several times, and he just ignores me. So
right.
I don't know.
Right. Same with me. So,
but hey, I appreciate the show, and thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, man. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, all right. Bye.
All right, folks. We're going to do a couple Iams. Let's see. Wait. Oh, yeah. I got this. All right. Okay. Here is a Hudson Institute. And who is this guy? Do we know? Who was it? It is a guy at the Hudson Institute. Hudson Institute, right-wing think tank, of course, that is a proponent of essentially ultimately war with Iran, right? I mean, this is what they want. They have destroyed the deal with Iran, and
this was a U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, Brian Hook.
Here's Brian Hook, and he's speaking to the Hudson Institute. And Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink, sort of upsets the apple cart here at the Hudson Institute. Here's how it went.
Cannot continue. It is time for all nations to join us in holding Iran to a new level of accountability for its destructive behavior, especially its lawless pursuit of ballistic missiles. Thank you.
That is the most ridiculous thing I have seen. The world community wants to keep the Iran nuclear deal. Our allies are the Germans, the French, the British. They want to keep in this deal. The world community wants to keep the deal. Let's talk about normal countries. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia. Is that who our allies are? They are the biggest threat to the world community. And let's talk. You're hurting me. You're actually hurting me. I want to ask, do you think these sanctions are hurting the regime, or are they hurting the Iranian people? They're hurting the Iranian people. You are making a case for war with Iran. How did the war with Iraq turn out? You're doing exactly the same thing we did in the case of Iraq. We don't want another war in the Middle East. Let's
you want to
see.
go outside and give
How
a
does
speech?
Iraq turn
You can
out?
do that.
How did
You want to go
Libya
outside
turn
and give a
out?
speech? You can do
We
that.
have the people of Syria suffering. And how dare you bring up the issue of Yemen? It's the Saudi bombing that is killing most people in Yemen. So let's get real. No more war. Peace with Iran.
She is exceptionally good at that. Exceptionally good. I remember the Code Pink people who were at the RNC in 2004. They're very good at it. And just the look on everybody's face sitting in that, like, oh, this is...
Ma'am, you can go outside and do this
Yes,
speech.
ma'am, you could do... It's pretty good. This stuff is important to do, I think, folks. It really, and even more so. I mean, she's been at this for decades, but I think it has more salience today. I really do. Very important. This is this number 7 right here that we have? So an ICE official were testifying in front of the, I'm not sure which committee this was, but it's Maggie Hassan. And they were testifying as to the implications of their zero tolerance policy and the policy of basically kidnapping children and separating them from their parents. Here is the Executive Associate Director for ICE, Matthew Albence, the Acting Deputy Commissioner for Customs and CPB, Robert Perez, admitting that they really hadn't done their due diligence when it came from assessing what their policy was going to do to the children in particular, obviously, that they kidnap.
So again, Mr. Albans, have you seen these statements from these DHS whistleblowers?
I don't believe I have, no.
And Mr. Perez?
I have not, Senator.
Beyond the pediatricians and the whistleblowers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement itself set up an advisory committee of subject matter experts to review family detention. And here's what the agency's own advisory committee found. It said that DHS should, quote, discontinue the general use of family detention, and that in cases where detention was absolutely necessary, families should be detained for, quote, the shortest amount of time possible. Now, given that it is DHS's own findings, I'm going to assume that you guys are familiar with that. Mr. Albans, given these findings from the American Academy of Pediatrics, DHS whistleblowers, and your agency's own advisory committee, why does Immigration and Customs Enforcement continue to support modifying the Florence Agreement to allow for the indefinite detention of children?
Okay, as I previously stated, we do not have indefinite detention. The Supreme Court has ruled on that.
But you are recommending the modification or overruling of the Flores decision, which would allow the indefinite detention of children.
Again, there is no indefinite detention of children. People are detained, and just
right now there isn't because the Flores
but again, our
agreement.
If you let me answer, please.
Excuse me, but I have limited amount of time here, and what I'm trying to get at is you are all here saying, or 3 of the 4 of you are here saying that you want us to allow the federal government to do something that the Flores Agreement does not currently allow. So I understand your current position, but why are you here recommending a set of changes that would allow the indefinite detention of children?
Okay. What we are doing in this regulation is implementing the process as contemplated by the court in its ruling, which was requiring the licensing of that children could be held in licensed facilities. We have been unable to get state licensure in most places. What we have requested and are proposing underneath this regulation is to establish a federal licensing scheme which will be similar and mirror to what we currently utilize in our standards that would enable us to have the authority to hold these individuals. There's no one is arguing there's not a humanitarian crisis. I think the numbers show it.
Mr.
Humanitarian
Albans,
crisis also.
I have limited time, so I'm going to ask you to stop for a second, because what I'm concerned about is your own agency says that there shouldn't be indefinite or long-term detention of children, that it should be as short as possible. And instead of going towards the remedies that could help us, some that Senator McCaskill suggested, some that you've heard from other members of the panel suggested, instead of going towards those remedies to deal with the immigration surge, you are instead recommending something that experts in child development and welfare ask you not to do.
That guy is effing evil. He knows exactly what he's being accused of, what he's ignored from his own agency, and sitting there and trying to be obtuse about it. God, man. These guys must have no kids or just, I don't know. I mean, that's too simplistic. You don't need to have children to do that. But what's amazing is that if he does have children, that he's able to do, like, it's just unbelievable. Now, I imagine his children are probably white. Which makes it a little bit easier for him to disassociate. Unbelievable. All right. Out of time for calls. I'm going to take 4 more Iams, and then we got to get out of here. I love Sarah Palin. First, why are Democrats getting on TV and screaming about how Republicans should follow the Clarence Thomas rule? Sam, put your strategist hat on. Obviously, Republicans only want to get past this as quickly as possible, so better for Ms. Ford to do the hearing. Oh, I agree. Or, like you suggested, go on 60 Minutes and say she isn't doing the hearing because Republicans have no interest in taking this serious. I agree. Being an avowed capitalist, I don't usually agree with Jamie, but she raises a point I'm sympathetic to in this whole hip-hop mindset as it relates to society. Why shouldn't we be like Nicki versus Cardi? Why can't we be more like Wu-Tang? I don't know. I don't even know what that's about. Contagious Chameleon, why do we get held up on pay-fors? Taxes don't fund spending. Cost of the government is irrelevant. She needs to lean into MMT. On air. It will save time, and the CNN audience will learn maybe something. She may not be a subscriber, but it's also something like, I don't know if you want to put that out, but I think that, like, you certainly shouldn't take the premise of pay-for seriously. Attorney Andrew, I know lots of people are saying if Kavanaugh is pulled, someone just as bad will be pushed through. However, this is an honest question. What are the odds you can find a conservative diehard jurist that doesn't have some skeletons in their closet? Like if you shake these people enough, embezzlement or writings or phrenology usually fall out. I think that's a problem, and I think there's also a problem that, remember, Colin still needs a fig leaf when it comes to abortion. And a lot of these people are upfront with it. But in the end, I think there's a debate. But I think in the end, I prefer stay in the game as long as you can. Keep Kavanaugh out. All right. The final IM of the day. Nom Dinet, this past weekend I was canvassing for the upcoming Toronto municipal elections. I was in the arguably richest neighborhood in Canada. 2 people stood out for their knowledge of Marxist theory. The depth and analysis rivaled anything I heard in MR Universe and beyond. What are your thoughts on champagne socialists?
In general, or is that a specific podcast or something?
I don't know.
I don't know. Well, we did talk about that on TMBS this week, so check that out.
Champagne socialists, the podcast, or just the idea of like smoked salmon socialists?
Well, we said against Spartan socialism. I don't know. This is kind of confusing.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my